talks today have been on discomfort, so this is not going to be entirely new for you. I'm just going to share my story to highlight the talks that have happened so far in a new way. And encourage you to stand on that edge of that discomfort. In your loop bags, you have a bookmark as a reminder how important it is when you want to run away, you want to turn around, you want to shrink, to stand on that edge and just remember that you're forming your wings. So I'm going to start with a question. How many of you have ever felt like you were meant for more, but something is holding you back? Yeah, it's really common. You might describe it like an invisible box, a ceiling you can't break, a chain you can't see. However you define it, it's the exact same feeling. It's discomfort, a pressure you can't quite name, but you know it's there. My daughter is smiling like crazy at me, so it's making me teary. I've never seen her smile so big. Mine felt like an invisible wall. No windows, no doors, walls too high to climb, foundation too deep to dig under. And for years, it pressed in on me, suffocating me. The truth that I didn't want to face, I was ashamed of being a girl. What I didn't know back then was how deeply that shame has shaped me, how it wove itself into every corner of my life, how it was the mortar that held my wall together. And then someone, like all the speakers today, had the courage to share their story with me, and in a single moment, my wall collapsed, and it was effortless. Suddenly, I was free, just because they gave me a new vision, a new possibility I couldn't yet see. But my story doesn't begin when my wall fell. It began when I built it. This is me, my mom, my dad. I'm 10 months old in that picture. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, but really it's 1,000 stories. At first glance, that looks like the picture of a well-knit family from the 70s. I don't mind, you guys know my age. I look great. But that's just one story, one of many possibilities. And I want you to notice what happens to the story you created from that picture, or what I've told you so far. When I tell you, this is the only photo I have with both my parents. My father left when I was born. According to my mom, he left because I was a girl. But the picture didn't change, but the story did. And with it, how it makes you feel. Which begs the question, how much of our lives is based on pictures like that, still frames in our minds that don't tell the full truth?
I want what you're on.
And maybe the story's not even yours. Many of us were born into a story we inherited, passed down through generations, and we live them out, unquestioned, in an effort to belong, feel worthy, or loved. But that moment of discomfort is powerful because it's trying to get your attention. And it's asking, is this my story, or did I inherit it? And even if this is my story, is it the most empowered version I could be living? My mom didn't question her story. She lived in a world that didn't value women, and in a family that devalued them. Her father told her, I hope you have a girl one day, so you know the curse that you were to me. My mom didn't miss an occasion to belittle me, make me feel inferior to my brother. He was more lovable, more capable, more wanted. She told me my father loved my brother, that he never would have left him. But then I came along, reinforcing the narrative, girls are a curse. And then talk about rejection. I was 10 years old when her sister announced she was having a girl. My mom told her to abort it. Otherwise, it would be the biggest mistake of her life. Now, I know you're not thinking my mom was evil. That's just one story. The real story is she was drowning. She was doing the best she could to survive a story passed down to her. And because she never broke free, she passed it down to me. And it sounded like this: you're not lovable, not worthy, not wanted, because you're a girl. So I worked really hard to prove my worth, to prove that I was just as capable and lovable as a man. I completed a double major in math and computer science, graduated top of my class, a male-dominated field at the time. And I thought that I had outrun that story. After graduation, my best friend called me and said, "The guys are having a guys' night out, but you're not invited because you're a girl." I was devastated. I had worked so hard to prove that I belonged. So I worked even harder until my body gave out, couldn't get out of bed, was exhausted, angry for no reason, and depression became a constant companion. I wore my story like armor, heavy, but familiar. I didn't know who I was anymore. I was successful on the outside, but inside, I wanted to die. And it's in that moment of discomfort, ready to end it all, that I had an insight. What if I lived first? I realized that I had never given life a chance. As a computer programmer, I knew that if I wanted a different outcome, I needed to write a different program. I wasn't looking for transformation. I just wanted to be me. I don't know how I chose my next step or even how I got there. But I remember the moment I opened the door to that improv theater. It felt like the lights had just been turned on. Like I had been living in black and white, and suddenly it was full color. I felt alive again. I reconnected to my playful, curious, spontaneous side. Somehow, saying yes and to a bunch of strangers turned into me saying yes and to life. I met the man of my dreams. We got married, and then pregnant. He's a very thicker man now. At the 4-month ultrasound, we had agreed to find out the gender. I thought that would be so much fun. We would tell all our family and friends. We would go celebrate, maybe go shopping. When the day came, the technician squirted that cold blue jelly on my belly. Why is that stuff so cold anyway? Doesn't make sense. And then she asked, "Do you want to know the gender?" I said no. My answer surprised me. And my husband looked like I had just licked all the icing off his cupcake. I think I had. He said, "What? We talked about this. What would you have done in this moment? Honor your truth or keep the peace?" I felt terrible. I didn't want to disappoint him. I just didn't have a clear reason why. I just knew I wasn't ready to find out. So I asked the technician to write it down. She shook her head. Said no. If I look, I have to write it in the file. And someone will tell you my mistake. If you don't want to know, then no one can know. But my husband pressed, "What? I want to find out." She said, "I honor the wishes of the mother." Have you ever felt your whole story begins to shift? Not through effort, but through a single sentence that hits your soul just right? For the first time, my truth didn't need a justification. It was honored, no explanation necessary. You don't need proof. Your brain doesn't need proof to change, just like Leslie was just sharing. It just needs a new picture, a new story. Now fast forward to the living room. I've done all the work, read all the books. I thought this moment was when all the pieces would click together and I would feel triumphant, free. My mom was there, jumping up and down. It's a girl, it's a girl. I'm not celebrating. I'm bracing myself. It feels more like she's rubbing salt in the wound. She's not celebrating the birth of a new baby, but passing down the baton and proving once and for all that she was right all along. So I tell her, as flatly as I can, Mom, it really doesn't matter. Which makes her question if I already knew, but I didn't. But then again, maybe I did, as Aaron would tell you. Maybe that's why I didn't want to find out during the ultrasound. I didn't want my daughter to feel what I had felt in the womb, disappointment. Then, in the most ordinary way, a nurse said something that changed everything. She said, a girl, that's you, is a blessing. I smiled, said yes, of course. Logically, I knew that. I knew that in the same way that I knew my father didn't leave because I was a girl, or that I was not less lovable or worthy than a man. Of course I knew that. Logically, but inside, I felt differently. As if she could sense that internal struggle, she leaned in. She looked me straight in the eyes and said, a girl is a blessing to you, the mother. I froze. My brain short-circuited for a moment. Thought, why is she being so pushy? And that's when I realized she had just given me a new story, a more empowering one, and one I wanted to live for my daughter. When you live stories you didn't choose, you shrink, you sabotage, you barely stay afloat. You do whatever it takes just to survive, and that doesn't look good on anyone. But that moment of discomfort is the threshold. It's the moment that your brain rewires and your identity reshifts. Your identity shifts. I skipped ahead. Gotta go back. That moment of discomfort is begging you to ask, is this my story? Is it still true? And even if this is my story, is it the most empowered version I could be living? What if that feeling of discomfort is just begging you to pause and ask the question? What if the cage you're in isn't real? What if the only thing standing between you and freedom is not action, but vision? I had done years of inner work, and still that wall remained. The more I tried to push through, the more I felt pressed in, quietly suffocating. And then someone shared their story with me. They said, I felt that pressure too. I know exactly the feeling you're talking about. So you can imagine at this point, I was leaning in. I wanted to know their secret. So I asked, and then what did you do? They shrugged and said, oh, one day my wall just came crashing down. What? How on earth was I going to use that? And that's when I saw it. The towering wall pressing against me for years, the one I'd never been able to escape, collapsed into a pile of rubble. And I realized for the first time it was never real. It was just a story I had created to protect myself from my mother's survival story. When the brain doesn't need proof to change, it just needs a new story. Discomfort is the threshold. It's the moment the brain rewires and your identity reshapes. Think of the hero's journey, or heroine, in our case. There's always a threshold, a moment of discomfort, fear, or resistance. You're not who you were, and you're not yet who you're becoming. Think of the caterpillar in the cocoon, messy, disoriented, becoming. The pressure forms the wings. Everyone is living a story, but is it yours? Maybe it belonged to your mother, or her mother, or the little girl in you just trying to feel safe. And maybe someone needs to hear your story now, not because it defines you, but because it refines you. When you share your truth, you open the door for someone to walk through theirs. Even if you think you were born into a black and white story, you have the power to paint it in full color. Right now, think of one sentence you've been living by, a story you didn't choose. Can you imagine what it would feel like to let it go? To write a new one? I no longer carry the shame of being a girl. I carry the pride of being a woman who changed her story for her daughters. When you change your story, you don't just set yourself free, you set future generations free. And as Aaron said, maybe past generations too. You don't need the perfect moment. You don't need permission. All it takes is a choice, a willingness, sometimes a single sentence to start the shift. So let me leave you with this. What if discomfort is just waiting for you to pick up the pen and rewrite the ending? Thank you.